Okay, it looks like we are live. Hello and welcome, everyone. I hope that everybody's having an amazing Thursday. If you're on the other side of the world, it's probably Friday for you. So I hope that you're getting a great start towards the end of your week. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. If you guys don't know, or if this is your first time being here, my name is Will Zapata with Apollo Energy. Basically, this is our Beyond the Solar series where we dive deeper into financial literacy, fatherhood, business, fitness, overall trying to encompass and improve every aspect of who we are as human beings. That way, we can be the best version of ourselves. So, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I'd love to be able to know from where you guys are watching this video. I'd love to be able to see the comments to see where you guys are located, and definitely to be able to connect with as many people as possible. So what we're going to be able to talk about today is the mistakes that I have made in business, basically the times that I have messed up and what those moments taught me. Now, of course, everybody has different stories, different things, different experiences when it comes to their situation in business. My goal with sharing my own personal either thoughts or situation or moments or failures is basically to be able to connect with other people, to be of service to other people, and to obviously work together as a community so we can serve our fellow human being. So with that being said, I'm definitely going to be able to dive into some real things that have happened to me, and I hope that by me sharing that with you, it empowers you to first and foremost go ahead and chase your dreams, right? Second, use failure as a tool to want to continue to keep going, and then lastly, for us to be able to build a community where we can speak about this with one another, where we can help one another out, and obviously be of service not just to the people watching, but to the next generation as well. So let's dive right into it. So the first thing is, and why I really want to talk about all the mistakes that I've made, is because anybody that has either started a business, been in business, is scaling a business, is watching a business, is is not minding their own business. But seriously, anybody that has dealt with anything in life, failure just comes as part of it as well, right? Whenever I look at starting the endeavor of wanting to create freedom and start a business on my own, you have to understand that failure comes with it. Failure is a part of the story, right? Failure is a part of the aspect when you're looking to create and run a business, but it does not have to define who you are. It doesn't have to define what your story is. I know that when we tend to, and this happens to me, but when we tend to look at other people's success stories, or we look at other people that, maybe they're in the position that we want to be in, we tend to look at it and think it's like, hey, their situation just happened to go up, right? They never had any downturns, they never had any failures in their life. But honestly, what I've noticed from my own experiences and just studying other people that I find successful in business specifically, is that when we get to see them, where we admire them, where we look up to them, where maybe we envy them a little bit, it's a natural human being, or it's a natural human feeling. When we find people that are at that level, typically we don't see all the failures that's happened in between. We don't see all the people that, maybe they didn't get the chance to obtain their goals. We don't get to see all the moments where perhaps they thought that they should not continue, or that this wasn't for them. I know for myself, I've definitely experienced that, where there are moments where I jump into self doubt. I ask myself if I'm really worth doing this, and I just understand that it's part of the process. And the only way that you can truly fail is if you give up, right? One of the things I love about the culture here in the United States, shout out to everybody in the United States and obviously other parts of the world, but the way that we look at it when it comes to business failure in the United States, we just look at it as it's part of the process. You can file for bankruptcy. Nobody looks at you or bats an eye if you've been able to, file for bankruptcy, or if you've had any issues, financially. We understand that, hey, as long as you don't give up, you'll be able to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. So I really want to hone in and use my mistakes, and I'd love to hear mistakes that you've made, basically to understand that that is part of the process, right? Failure is a learning process. It's a learning step that we all have to take. So one of the first mistakes that I made when I first got into business is really not understanding the financials of it, right? I have read in a lot of books where it talks about, you don't start to make money right away, or maybe you have to kind of seek finances elsewhere. And from my own personal story, I felt like I was extremely lucky because I felt that one, I was in a position like you guys have probably heard before, but I was living with my mom. I was living in her basement, so I got to save up some money. And then I also think that I got lucky because I started to make money relatively fast in my business. Now, looking back at it, the problem with it is that you always tend to have this mindset where you think that you're special and you think that it's always going to keep happening, right? One of the biggest lessons that I learn from is really looking at the financials, looking at every single cent, understanding that cash flow is king, understanding that you have to look at every dollar that you're putting into your business and how much money is coming out of it, how long is it taking, how long is it taking for you to make an ROI, if you are even making an ROI, right? So one of the things that really helped me in a sense was like I've always been economically conservative, as you guys might know. But really, I think that one of the biggest mistakes I made was really not looking at the money in great details, right? Especially when things change, right? If you're in an industry like, for example, the solar industry, that tends to have a lot of changes. It's not at a place where it's pretty consistent. It's pretty like standard, right? We tend to think that money is going to always continue to come in, and then one day or another something changes, whether it's incentives change, whether it's permitting changes, whether it's other changes that it's outside of your control, right? Those things happens, and then all of a sudden you start to notice that you're not making as much money as you were before, or now it's costing you more money in order for you to acquire a client, right? So maybe in certain points of your business or in your overall flow of life, you were making really good money, and then all of a sudden, because you wasn't paying attention to it, that completely changed. One of the things that I look at it is, I try to look at as respecting the money, right? I think that if you don't pay attention to every single dollar, right, money is just gonna flow out of your pocket and you won't understand why. And if I could go back and ask, and talk to the younger me, right, I would really say pay attention to every single cent that comes into your business, pay attention to every single cent that leaves out, right? Things are not always going to remain the same. Sure, you might be crushing it and making a lot of money, but there could be something that can change. So prepare for the worst. Or maybe you're not making a lot of money, but you're learning the fundamentals. Which, looking back at it, sometimes I wish that it was a little bit harder for me to acquire funds in the beginning, because I felt like I would have learned a lot of important lessons that, looking back at it, I realized I took it for granted, right? So that's definitely it. And then the other part is, don't try to outgrow your position, in the sense of like, don't try to increase your expenses when it's not necessary. One of the other things that I think that I made a huge mistake on is getting an office earlier than what I needed. I think it was cool. I think it was, great, once the team started to grow, but especially in the beginning, I wish that we would have stayed as lean as possible, right? I wish that I would have just tried to cut even more expenses as my income grew. I should have cut down more expenses and just try to be as lean as I possibly can, until it doesn't make any sense for you to stay that small, right? Once you have people that are working with you that you want a center place to meet, if it makes sense, sure, get an office. But if there's a way that you can, again, try to stay as lean as you can, I would definitely encourage it. The other mistake that I think I made was that I gave away my position too fast, right? So this is what I mean. I think that sometimes when we have the idea of what being an owner of a company is, or being an owner of a business is, we always assume that we need to hire a whole bunch of people to do things that maybe either A, we're not competent in, or B, we're just not good at. And I think that for me, and this is just my own personal situation, I think that I was too quick to do that. And what I should have done was, I should have realized that before I delegate something, I should have thought about, one, is this actually needed, right? Like, do I need to have this task done? How important is this task? Secondly, is like, okay, well, if I do need it, what's the most simplest and most efficient way that I can do it, right? Am I adding too many steps to it? Am I, maybe not getting to what the real importance of the task is? And then finally, if I do need to delegate that task, right, make sure that I set the right expectations at the beginning, make sure that I have what my description of the task that I need outlined as much as possible. Definitely, you can't build a business on your own no matter what, right? I know people say it's lonely at the top. I mean, as if you're standing, that's if that only works if you're standing on top of a whole bunch of people. But when you're trying to work with a team, especially in the beginning, right, you want to try to do as many things as you possibly can and only delegate when you're really, like, let's say, losing out on, increased revenues because that task that you're doing is taking too long. Maybe it makes sense for you to hire someone else that can then do that in a more efficient way. And if you are going to hire somebody to do a task, make sure that they're better at it than you, right? Because people typically, whenever you hire somebody, they're going to be at 70% as good as you are. And if it's a task that you're either not skilled in or it's just not your strong suit, definitely make sure that those person or those people that you are hiring, they complement what your weaknesses are. For me, I don't like doing charts. I don't like doing sheets. I like to look at them, but when it comes to actually doing it, I'm not a big fan. But I need somebody that can be way better at me at doing like Excel spreadsheets, doing things in Google Sheets, just back end things that would take me much longer to do. That somebody smarter than me or way more skilled than me can definitely do it and do it much more efficiently. So, again, for me, I felt like one of the biggest mistakes that I made was, you know, I already have, like, I was trying to give away what my position was too fast. I was trying to give people too much responsibility without proper oversight. So what I really want to impart on you guys is, again, make sure that if you're going to hire, you hire very efficiently, and then make sure that you set the right expectations up front, right? Think about every scenario. Think about, what happens if they don't do something. What happens if something is not clear? What's the right way to give proper feedback? What's the right way to give guidance? What's the right way to really tap into, how to bring out the best out of people that you're going to hire? Because at the end of the day, the reason why you want to hire people is so they can, remove a task and then free you up to do what you're actually good at. But most importantly, make sure that you're hiring people that are much smarter than you, right? So again, if you guys have an opportunity, whether you're watching live or you watch this at another time, I'd love to see the comments to see where you guys are watching this from. If you are deciding to, going to go out on your own and start a business, what business are you thinking about? I'd love to hear more of that. I'd also would love to learn, what made you decide to want to start a business. I would love to hear what kind of business are you thinking about starting if you haven't started. What's holding you back? What questions do you have? Again, the whole point of us doing this is to create a community of people that we can help share our stories and be there for one another. So the other mistake that I made, I would probably say, was me not valuing a customer. Listen, right? I think that I was extremely lucky to be able to get into an industry such as solar, especially at the time that I got in, where people were just learning about it. It felt like it was relatively new. I felt like that was a great opportunity. However, I didn't realize how important it is to have a client. I didn't realize how important it is to really communicate with the homeowners, with the customers. For me, looking back at it, this is something I share with my team, is I look at it as every client, we have to, like, almost really be able to make sure that we establish long-term relationships with them, make sure that we're doing what we say that we're going to do, make sure that every client that we ever speak with moving forward, that we look at them like we're going to have to stay and communicate with this client for the foreseeable future, right? We want to make sure that we're doing proper follow-ups, that we're making sure that we're building trust, that we're building relationships. Because let me tell you, right, when things change, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, where I remember, like, when I first started in solar, like, it was very uncommon for somebody to get another quote or something. Now, when I speak to someone, they already know about solar, they have multiple quotes, like, it's just the whole situation has changed, and it's so much harder to try to get a new client that has never heard you before, has never done business with you, as opposed to you having a client that maybe referred you. Maybe you have a book of clientele that you can draw back on. Maybe you have, like, great reviews, great testimonials, all those things that I wish I would have done from the beginning, and basically been able to build like a solid book of business, been able to, the way that I look at it, have like a whole Bible of evidence showing how great your work is, how great your service is, showing how great your communication is, right? All those things that really help build trust, help build, security when it comes to meeting with the families. Because at the end of the day, people want to make sure that they're doing business with the right person. And if I had, done that from the beginning or had that mindset from the beginning, it wouldn't hit me as hard as it did when things change, right? And trust me, like I mentioned before, there are times where I don't even know why I get up in the morning. There are times that I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing. There are times where it feels like everything I do is just incorrect. But at the end of the day, I realize that this is a lesson that I'm going through. If I can overcome this hurdle, it's going to make me that much stronger. Moving right along. So now the other lesson was like letting my ego delay change. And for this one, I think that the biggest mistake that I ever made was not listening to my inner self enough. I think that because of the boom that I was in the industry, I listened to many people that were experts, and I looked at too many people that were having success in their own right, but I had no idea how they were having success, right? I'm a person to admit it. I felt some envy. I felt like, if they could do it, why couldn't I? But it allowed me to make a lot of mistakes that I didn't need to make, especially financial mistakes. It also made it harder for me to be innovative if I'm just trying to follow what other people are doing. I should have just hunkered down on what was working for me, what was working for my team, double and triple down on that, together with making sure that I look at every cent and follow every cent that's going in and out of the business. I think that, and just let go of the ego where I thought that if I was not doing X amount of numbers, I couldn't compete with anybody else. And now most of those people, they're either not in solar, in a different company, different industry. And it was just, I wasted so much time and energy looking at what other people were doing to try to then mimic the success that I thought they were having. And then it was all for nothing, right? I was listening to everybody's own story except myself. And again, it's led me to where I am now. Again, depending on how you look at it, right? Mistakes are just part of the things that happen in business. Like, it is what it is. The difference is that the people that are successful are able to keep going, right? But when it comes to like really listening to like kind of your own economy, within what's working for your business, especially if it's working fine, double and triple down on that, right? Not that you can't be open to ideas, not that you can be humble enough to admit like, hey, I was wrong about something and change, but I did things for so long, spent so much money, took a very bad marketing approach, hoping that things would change just so I can keep up with everybody else, that it ended up hurting me more than helping me. So let go of your ego, right? You don't need to, keep doing things that are not working for long periods of time, right? Sometimes, again, giving up, it's really the only thing that makes you look bad, but making mistakes, failing, falling down and getting back up, all those things are just part of what it is to have a business, right? So just continue to move forward, and continue to do the best that you possibly can, right? So those were basically my lessons that I had, or the mistakes that I made. I do call them lessons, right? So definitely wanted to share that with you guys, just to kind of recap. Again, the first mistake was not understanding the financials. Not really looking at every cent, especially when you're doing good. It's very easy to overlook that. But at the end of the day, cash flow will determine how your business is doing. The other mistake was, giving away my position way too fast. I think that I hired more people than what I needed to. I didn't work on actually building a system that would work for me, right? I think I was just trying to do what I thought other people wanted of me. And then I wasn't clear on what the expectation was when I did hire people. The other mistake was not valuing a client, right? I took things for granted. I took people for granted, and I'm not afraid to admit that because we're all human. We all make mistakes. But looking back at it, definitely, taking the customers for granted was probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made. And then finally, obviously, like, letting my ego get the best of me, feeling like I had to do certain things, even if it was detrimental to me, just so I can show face in front of other people that today they don't even ask me how I'm doing, or have a cup of coffee with me, right? So it's funny how life works, where a lot of the things that we think are important really are not that important, right? If you guys are looking to get into either the solar industry or looking into get into kind of any other industry, you want to share your stories. If you're in, you're looking about getting into the solar industry and you want to avoid the mistakes that I've made, please feel free to reach out because I'd love to be able to share my story. I'd love to be able to help other people avoid the mistakes that I made, right? At the end of the day, mistakes are only mistakes if you continue to make them, but if you learn from them, then lessons learned. I hope that you guys were able to find this valuable. I know I did. I definitely enjoy sharing my story with y'all, and I look forward to seeing y'all again. Take care.